Today, in this video, we're going to talk about 5 common mistakes, shooting issues that I see when I'm teaching people in lessons or classes. Let's get to it. So, in classes, I commonly see a couple things, and we're going to talk about what they are and the way we can work towards solving them. So let's get into it. Number 1 is your common low left hit for a right-handed shooter, low right hit for a left-handed shooter. What causes that? So what causes that is the firing hand tenses up. And what we mean by that is if you don't feel that you're gripping the gun properly, you're gonna start to want to push with this hand to control recoil. This hand is directly attached to the gun and holding it, so you're gonna wanna push down. That typically causes something along the lines of this. You're about to shoot, you're uncomfortable with what's about to happen, and you tense up or you push into the gun. Now, with that said, there is a temporary Band-Aid that I give people in classes that will help with that. And this is the most common correction that I give in a class to a shooter that's having this issue, is to tighten the left hand, the support hand, and rotate the support elbow slightly. So it looks like this. I'm going to tighten this hand up a little more, and I'm going to rotate this elbow. So you'll see in the side view here, you'll see that it starts to rotate up. What that does, it doesn't solve the issue of this hand wanting to do the work. It just gives more resistance to what's happening. So if you have more resistance here and this hand is trying to push, it's not allowed to move. Typically speaking, in the moment, that fixes it right away. But that doesn't mean that you don't have work to do at that point. That just means temporarily you know how to address it. And if you incorporate that subconsciously into your shooting, you will get better results more often. But you're going to want to work on the other component here, which is the firing hand push. And with that, I would recommend a couple things. I would recommend making sure that the gun is in the right position in the hand. I like to put it in line with the forearm bone. Okay, I'm applying pressure with my bottom 2 fingers here, and that's allowing me to grip as tight as I want to feel mentally comfortable that the gun is not going to move on me. When you find the gun doesn't move as much, you're going to get more mentally comfortable. The more mentally comfortable you end up being, the faster and more accurate you end up shooting. So what's a quick way to kind of play around with this maybe in dry fire? In dry fire, a quick way to play around with this would be a trigger controlled speed drill. Strong hand only, that's one way to do it. So if I just set a beep here and I use the beep as my initiation and try to get the trigger press done before the beep is complete, that is my intention. So I could do it strong hand only. So this really works on the movement of the trigger finger. There's no support hand there, so I'm holding here. Right, really get that gun more still. That's one way. Number 2 is I will present the gun and I'll just try to press 6 shots off. Two-handed, one-handed, doesn't matter. So I can come up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Strong hand is going to be more challenging. Two-hand is going to be easier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? And we're going to try to make sure we reduce the movement to 0. That's going to help with this hand. In live fire, there's an exercise called sewing machine. If you guys haven't checked it out, there's a link in the description below. Sign up for the free drills. The sewing machine is part of that, and it is a game changer when it comes to this sort of thing. So that's number 1. Let's get on to number 2, which correlates with this issue as well. So going off that path, firing hand tension is a big problem. The reason we get firing hand tension in the first place is because we're not used to recoil. There's a certain feel to it. There's a certain sound to it. There might be a flash, right? People are uncomfortable with that. We're not meant to have a mini explosion going off in front of our face. Like it's not something we're instinctively comfortable with. So we have to get acclimated to it. And what we mean by acclimation is being able to hold still for just long enough that the bullet has left the barrel of the gun. When the bullet leaves the barrel, recoil hasn't even happened. So the slide has not even moved yet. If you watch a slow motion video of a gun going off, the bullet has left the barrel just as the slide might be starting to move. So you just have to hold still long enough for that to happen. And at any point after that, you can do whatever you want with the gun. It's a common thing that I'll do in classes where I'll start aimed on target and I'll press the trigger and I'll yank the gun off target. And the shot will go where I want it to go. Why? Only because I've held the gun still long enough for the bullet to leave the barrel. At that point, I can do anything I want. And in competition, this is very advantageous because if I know that, I can now move the gun more aggressively from target to target as long as I hold still long enough. So, acclimation to recoil. How do we train it? Here's a great exercise that we can use for this. 50-50 exercises. I learned these when I trained with Tactical Performance Center back in 2017. It was a long time ago. Great class if you guys ever get the chance to take that as well. You start with magging the gun, load the gun, right? Take the magazine out. So now you have no magazine in the gun and you have one round in the chamber. There's a couple different variations of it, but this is the simplest one and you can kind of change it around as you want to. I'll give you another variation in a minute here. What you're going to try to do, you're going to start from a presentation, right? Shoulders relaxed. I'm sitting here ready to start shooting. And I'm going to present the gun and try to fire 2 shots. I'm going to get a bang and a click. On the click, pay attention. Pay very close attention to what happens because that's what's going to show you what is happening. And you want that to happen. You want to see it because if you see it, you can reduce it, you can eliminate it. And when those 2 things happen, you start to get a tighter group and you start to center the shots up more in the middle of the target. Another thing I'll do in a class with students is when they're having that sort of issue where they're moving the gun around before the bullet leaves the barrel, is I'll press the trigger for them. They hold the gun still, I press the trigger for them, and almost all the time, the shot goes in an entirely different place that they were aiming. Why? Again, because they don't know when the shot's going off, so all they're doing is holding still. If they anticipate that the shot's going to go off, they might do something to disturb it. So another 50-50 exercise that I've done that I like to do, same thing, mag, load the gun, take the mag out, 1 round in the chamber, empty mag well. I start on 2 targets. So I come and I present up on 1 target, I fire the shot, and then I dry fire on the 2nd target. This gives you a way to just practice transitions, learning how to hold still while you're moving the gun and doing more, an extra layer of movement and skill. So this just stacks on top of the basic setup, and then it allows you to practice transitions as well. So that's acclimation. Getting acclimated to the gun going off, going to be a big jump in your performance. Let's get to number 3. You've probably had this if you're a new shooter and it's your first time running a red dot. You might have seen this, even if you have a little experience, this might happen to you occasionally, especially if you have a smaller dot window. You go to present the gun. Tell me this doesn't sound familiar. Go to present the gun, and we do what's called the maraca. So we go to present the gun, and the dot isn't there, and you do a little bit of this, and there it is. Okay, I got it. I can start shooting. Not having the dot in the window or your sights aligned is a common issue when it comes to presenting the gun, especially. What that means is that we're not presenting the gun in a way that keeps the gun straight as we're presenting the gun and builds our grip. If our grip isn't tight as we're moving the gun out, like we're starting to present the gun and the grip should get tight about halfway. It should be really tight, almost fully formed by that point. That means that there's potential for deviation in the optic. And with a red dot, it's a bit different. With iron sights, you can see that and you can kind of correct for it as you're going. With an optic, you can't do that. If the dot is not in the window, it's much, much harder to figure out where it is. So that's why we all end up doing this. There's a simple way to do this, and it's my presentation process, and it's simple 4-word phrase: fingers, palm, pressure, leverage. Okay. So what does that mean? Fingers touch first here. While we're, if it's a draw, as soon as the gun comes out, I'm trying to put the fingers in their final resting place. That sets the leverage point to make the grip tight early. Okay. If I'm from presentation, my shoulders are relaxed. I'm sitting here like this. You can see my hand isn't even connected to the gun yet. So fingers touch first, then the palm touches, and I apply pressure. So I start applying pressure on the gun, and I talk about this specifically in another video about the kind of pressure. It's a pull the fingers to the palm, push the palm to the fingers, and that really leverages on the panel well. Fingers, palm, pressure, and as I'm applying that pressure, I'm starting to move the gun out, and I'm starting to roll my elbows, okay? And I roll the elbows up, and this puts the dot in the center of the window pretty much every time, right? It makes it much easier to be able to fire, and I'm using the phone as a target here. But you can see there's a very consistent, I'm expecting that red to show up where I want it every time, and it is. And this works really, really well. This is a very, very critical point for most people who are having problems. If you are the kind of person that says, man, I don't always have the dot when I'm putting the gun on target, this is the tip that you listen to, because this is going to work really, really well for you. Again, fingers, palm pressure, and then leverage, and that's going to put the dot in place better. And the grip is ready. I'm ready to shoot. I can shoot full speed right here. My grip is fully formed here, and then I'm just waiting for it. Another little tip for that is, instead of going up and out, right? See how that looks kind of, the muzzle's tilted up? Try to push more forward and then rise up at the very end. Because what'll happen is your grip is formed early. The dot's already there. I could see it down here. And now I just have to bring it up to my face. And that allows me to shoot more immediately with more aggression. Anytime you have this sort of movement up, or like a real downward movement, not only are you introducing vertical error, you're also introducing rotational error, and your grip won't be formed until the very end. So give those two things a try there. That should help your presentation. It should help your first shot accuracy. It also should help your follow-up shot speed. That's going to make a big difference. All right, let's get on to number 4. All right, so number 4. Are you looking at your target, or are you looking at the dot or sights? So one thing that I've learned over the last few years is target focus generally is more intuitive, and it generally works better. So I've been adopting that practice. I shoot all of my targets target focused, whether it's an optic, which the whole purpose of an optic is to be able to do that to begin with, both eyes open, focused on the target, but with irons as well. So I shot irons for many, many, many years. And when I started shooting irons target focused, I started to find that I was more accurate, even at distance. Now, what might be the reason for that? When you're target focused, what ends up happening is you end up holding on a spot. So like when we point at things, I look at the thing I want to point at and I point. I don't focus on my finger and try to line it up there. So watch this. This is going to be interesting. I'm going to aim at the phone camera, and I'm going to focus on the lens that I think is taking this video. Okay? And I'm going to aim there, and I'm going to just pin my vision there. Notice how the gun doesn't move very much. Now watch what happens when I focus on the dot. So I'm still here looking at the target, focusing on the dot, right? And notice how it's starting to, I could see it drifting. I don't know where to aim. Now I look right back at the phone camera, and I get pinpointed back on there. Guys, you could try that at home. I would highly recommend trying that. It's going to give you an eye-opening view of what's actually happening. When you pull into your front sight, when you pull into your dot, you lose your position on the target. Now, switching back and forth temporarily is a solution. You can do that, but it ends up, you can drift. I've had it happen to me when I'm shooting iron sights. I pull into the front sight way back before I started doing target focus, and I notice I'm shooting off, and I saw clearly aligned sight picture, and I didn't disturb the gun when I shot, and it's off. And that's because it started drifting off target like you saw in this video. So being able to stay focused on the target is going to help tremendously. Also, now, there's an exception to this, and I'll talk about that in a second. But if you are at your normal outdoor range, or even if you're in a low light course and you have a flashlight, a bright flashlight, you're going to clearly be able to see your sight alignment, even if it's a little blurry. So I would advise you to give that a try. Go outdoors, look at a target while you're aiming through your sights, and you're going to find that you can see the alignment just fine. Go in a place that's dark, shine a light, point your gun. You're going to find that you can see the contrast of your sights pretty good, even if you're staring at the target. Where the exception lies is in those not quite so brightly lit places. And at that point, you don't have to pull back fully onto the front sight, but shifting your vision back a little bit, I have found to be more helpful. That does help, especially if you have a blacked out rear and a relatively black front notch with maybe a dot, or the dot's dirty. That will be the one exception that I will make to this. So target focused all the time. If you want with an optic, you can occlude it. And by occluding it, if you are focusing on your dot, you're going to find that you don't see anything else. And then the second you start to look at your target, this eye is trying to look through. Obviously, it's blocked. This eye is what's making the vision become clear, the image become clear. Your brain actually takes what it's seeing from both eyes and just creates a picture as if it weren't blocked. And that's helpful to know. Also, occluding the dot does help strengthen your non-dominant eye to be able to meet where the dominant eye is looking. And that is very, very powerful in my opinion. That's even more of a reason to do it for a sustained period, in my opinion. So stay focused on the target, find that you can get more precise hits faster. All right, let's get on to the last one. All right, down to the number 5, last one for this video. What is shot calling? Now, we might have all heard what shot calling might be. Different people say different things. I usually ask in a class just to understand what people's knowledge of it might be, because quite honestly, even my understanding of it was not quite correct up until a couple years ago. But once you understand how to properly call shots, your game goes up tremendously because you're going to become that much more aware of what's happening. The more aware you are of what's happening, the more chance you have to identify it and fix it. You can identify and fix it, you're going to start progressing. That's just the nature of progress, provided you continue to train and put in effort into your growth. So, shot calling, let's talk about it. There's a couple methods of which we can use for shot calling. Shot calling essentially means, where did I think the bullet went when the shot went off? Now, when the shot went off, what we use to determine like the bullets left the barrel, that can be different. So there are a couple different ways people do this. I'll give you 3 methods. You guys can experiment with all of them, and then I'll tell you which ones I use. So method number 1 is we can actually use, and they're not in priority order. This is just the way that I learned it in a sense. So method number 1 is, as soon as the trigger breaks, right? As soon as we feel ourselves hit the back wall of that trigger travel, we can assume that the bullet has potentially left the barrel. Okay. At that point, we can do anything we want with the gun to get it to the next shot, whether that's put the gun back down to where it was on target for the second shot, whether it's moved to a different target, whether it's run, whether it's do a reload, whatever. At that point, we can determine that the shot has gone off. Okay. There's an issue with this one though, that you have to just be aware of. It is the fastest. It will go the quickest for you because it's the earliest sign that a shot has gone off, trigger break. However, just be careful of this if you use this method. What happens is sometimes we do what's called, we commit to leaving, and when we feel that the shot is about to go off, we move a little bit before it actually happens. So be very careful of that. I had that happen to myself, so I do it a little bit differently now. But that is the quickest way, and it does work well if you're able to really key into that hitting the back wall of the trigger travel. That's number 1. Number 2, trigger lift. So it's the opposite. So instead of using the brake, we're using the lift to where I would start to reset the trigger. And that's a bit more positive, meaning the bullet has already left the barrel 100% at that point. If you're able to be quick back on resetting the trigger, this is going to work out really well for you. If you're someone who's been taught to pin the trigger and hold it and then reset, this is not going to work well for you. And honestly, that's not a good habit. That's a habit you're going to want to break because it really doesn't contribute to any sort of performance, whether accuracy or speed. So again, as soon as my finger is lifting off the trigger, at that point, I can 100% assume that the bullet's left the barrel at that point. So benefit to this one, it's very positive. Like, you know that the bullet's gone. I can do whatever I want. The potential downside to this one is if you're a pin and reset kind of person, this is going to be very slow. It's not very slow, but slower than any of the other methods because you're taking too much time to get back onto the trigger reset. Number 3 is dot or sight lift, dot or front sight lift. So when we fire, and the downside to this is it only really works in live fire, or if you're new into the realm of Quest and VR training, ACE makes a virtual reality training system for shooting that does incorporate dot lift, which I find to be very useful. Talk about that maybe in a separate video, but highly recommend looking into that for dry fire training because of this particularly, that, and you get accountability. So for dot lift, it's a live fire only thing unless you have a virtual reality training system that'll allow you to kind of do this in dry fire. But as soon as I fire, that recoil starts, bullet leaves the barrel, recoil starts to happen. At some point, I'm going to see a moment where the dot starts to move up. When that happens, I can assume wherever that dot started to lift from, that it will be in that area within about a fist size group. So if I grab a target here, I can assume, so black means hard cover for people who are newer to this, to competition shooting. This means a miss. The brown is the brown or white, depends on the internationally, the colors can be different, but typically in USA it's a cardboard target. So the cardboard, wherever this happens to be, the dot's moving around, it's not going to be stationary. Wherever it happens to start to move, that's where you can assume the shot went. Now, this also works very well because you're able to see if there's any movement during the trigger press. So if I'm here, right, and all of a sudden I start pressing the trigger and I see something like that, I know that shot, that check mark, ended up with the shot being around this area, which could potentially be a miss. Okay, but this is not an ideal shot for us. But we using dot lift, you typically have the most visual awareness of where the shots are going. It's not any slower than trigger lift. It is a little bit more positive if you're very visually in tune and aware of what's happening with the gun. When it comes down to being slower per se, it's really only 0.02 to 0.03, which really doesn't make a difference. If you want to make up that time, you would make up that time by being sure of what you saw, the hit was acceptable, and being able to do the next thing a little quicker. That's how you make up that time. So those are the 3 methods: trigger lift, dot lift, trigger break. Methods I personally use, I use trigger lift and I use dot lift. And the reason why is because they correlate to about the same. So I use trigger lift in dry fire, typically when I'm doing like actual dry fire, not virtual reality training where there is movement. And I'll use dot lift in live fire. If for some reason, so when it comes to the trigger break, something we said is we can commit early. We think it's going to go off and we move a little bit early. On trigger lift, if for some reason you go off of trigger lift, like that's not really going to happen very much. It's very rare that happens unless you tremendously overcommit. So trigger lift and dot lift correlate to about the same timing, which is why I use the 2 of them interchangeably. Because if for some reason one takes over the other, it's going to be about the same thing. So let's wrap this up and let's get going. All right, guys, so we're at the end of the video here. Let's just quickly sum it up. 5 things: low left hits, crush with the support hand, rotate the support elbow. Acclimation to recoil, 50-50 exercises, present, bang, click, draw, bang, click, or variations of that. 3, to fix the maraca, fingers, palm, pressure, leverage, present more forward than up, and keep the gun with the muzzle level. Make sure you're focusing on the target, not pulling into your dot or your front sight. If you need to, you can tape over the optic for both live and dry fire. Even with the front sight, I've put tape over the front sight in dry fire, and it does work reasonably well. And last, calling shots, trigger break, trigger lift, or dot or sight lift. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, put them down below. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Have the best day.